Our session will deal with access to food, access to life. In this session, we'll be having three speakers giving us different perspectives on the way to tackle the issue of access to food and access to life, of course. Our first speaker is my friend Joachim von Braun. Joachim is the director for the Center for Development Research in Germany, and he's a professor for economic and technological change at the University of Bonn in Germany. His research addresses international development, economic topics, economic of natural resources, poverty, science and technology, food policy, and trade. Dr. von Braun also worked for almost 7 years as the Director General for the International Food Policy Research Institute, IFPRI, for whom of you who know about the CGIAR system. It is one of the 16 centers of the CGIAR, and it is based in Washington. Dr. von Braun is a member of the German National Academy of Science and Engineering and a fellow of the American Association for the Advancement of Science. Dr. von Braun, the floor is yours.
Colleagues and friends, good afternoon. What is your biovision? My biovision, as you will hear in this talk, is of course bioeconomy. So this is an economist talking to you in this science-oriented conference. So somebody from the social science stepping in. Access to food, access to life, food security and bioeconomy is this talk. And I'm grateful for the invitation, and I'm pleased to be chaired by Dr. Matki Matkur. I'm sure he will bring the best out of us by facilitating hard questions. Ladies and gentlemen, the Millennium Development Goals have been mentioned during the day. Those goals which the heads of state have set to be achieved by 2015, and among goal number 1 is to cut hunger in half by 2015 compared to 1990. The world is not on track with that goal. Less than half the developing countries are on track. When we talk about food security, what do we mean by that fuzzy word? Food security actually has 3 components, and those must not be open to interpretation. They have been defined clearly in long elaborations among researchers and finally adopted by policymakers. Essentially 3 issues are at stake. The availability of food must be assured. That relates mostly to production and trade. The access to food needs to be assured at all times. That relates mostly to people's purchasing power that depends on income and prices. And the nutritional use needs to be appropriate, and that relates to the health and sanitation environment of people, the knowledge and the age pattern and so on of people. What I'm going to talk about is what has changed recently in the world food scenery and what has changed in our understanding of it, and what does this mean for further research and for different policy action. You can simply think of a world food equation as an equation between the balancing supply and demand, and in between markets and trade. This simplistic idea of the world food system I will then gradually undermine in my talk. It's not just an equation. So I start up with a caricature of the world food system, the world food equation. It's a complex set of equations, actually. But I don't want to be too complex at the outset. What is written in red in this slide, land degradation, water scarcity, climate change, technology and its advances, consumer behavior, bioenergy, financial markets, those are new or much more influential drivers of the traditional food equation of the world. And I will mostly focus on that. I will not tire you that late in the day with lots of the traditional forces in the world food system. So, taking this approach, let me first look very briefly to supply side and resource issues. We have to be constantly reminded that agricultural productivity growth in the developing countries, and actually not only there, globally, is too low to sustainably provide the supply which the growing and more rich world population needs. So more research and investment in plant breeding, biotechnology is urgently needed, and there are excellent sessions coming later in the conference, so I will not dwell much on this. But these curves of downward trending productivity of grains is just indicative of too low productivity growth. Actually, total factor productivity growth is too low and not accelerating enough. The degradation of land and soils is accelerated. It's a productivity constraint. We need a global assessment of the costs of inaction versus cost of action in the land and soil degradation field. A large share of the poorest of the poor, of the hungry poor, live on degraded areas. Water scarcity, physical and economic, is severe and in some parts of the world increasing. I will inject into this presentation, I think 4 or 5 times, some brief suggestions. What are the implications of what we observe at a global level for the Arab region and for Egypt? So here's my first insert. One very important implication to be repeatedly emphasized, and I feel I didn't hear enough about it at the conference so far, is that water use efficiency in agriculture through technology and irrigation and institutional change needs to be accelerated. The focus needs to be more emphasized here. I purposely put here the institutional changes also needed, a more clear separation of land and water use markets. These markets can only work efficiently if they are handled according to their characteristics. Land is fixed, water flows. If the landowner also owns some water which flows by, it will be inefficient. Let me come to the main part of my presentation, the demand side and access issues and actions. I will emphasize that the biggest changes and the new drivers in the world food system are on the demand side. These are the traditional drivers, more food consumption per capita, especially high acceleration of animal foods production when people get richer. And you see these curves for milk, meat, eggs trend upwards. What, however, comes in addition is a fast acceleration of the utilization of biomass for energy and for chemical industry utilization. in a more CO2 neutral future scenario of the world economies, other energy sources have to kick in. And we see already on the left-hand side of this graph the trends on top of this graph in global biomass consumption going up for energy use. And in the chemical industry, the current share of about 13% will also increase, replacing oil and coal and so on. So this is a new factor of demand, the utilization of biomass for industrial purposes and for energy purposes. Biomass, however, which will be one of the main resources for the future, is not equally distributed around the world, and it is increasingly impacted upon by climate change. In this graph from a publication in Science a couple of years ago, you see that the increase biomass is partly in the north and partly in the south, in the Americas and in Africa. But further work on this suggests that the biomass supply of parts of the southern hemisphere may decrease. Anyway, we already have implicitly a lot of trade in biomass. We don't just trade grains, such as about 10 million tons to Egypt of wheat. We trade implicitly biomass, also through the trade of biofuels from Brazil and North America and so on. We implicitly trade biomass when Europe buys palm oil from Southeast Asia and substitutes that for oil imported from Saudi Arabia. So biomass trade and energy markets are interlinked by now. The biomass and its products form the bioeconomy, exemplified by this pyramid. Biomass at the bottom, staples, animal feeds, the bioenergy, biomaterials, biochemicals are what is increasingly competing with each other. And that is a change in the world food system. Understanding the world food system as a supply and demand of grain consumed for food and for feed is outdated. It's part of the story. You don't capture the full story that way. So let me leave you with this definition in between. The bioeconomy encompasses all those sectors and their related services which produce, process, or use biological resources in whatever form. So the biovision we are talking about here has, from an economic perspective, to embrace this broader perspective and not see the food economy as an isolated thing which you can influence with a little bit of production action here and a bit of demand tweaking there. That would lead to inefficiency and failure. One implication of these developments in the bioeconomy, which I have introduced to you, is that for the Arab region, is that more focus on the bioeconomy is needed. Productive biomass utilization. The region is extremely poor in biomass. Reduction of waste and reduction of losses in the biomass and the food and feed systems. So a much more careful dealing with the biomass shortages needs to be on our strategic research agenda in the region. Let me come to my third segment of this talk, prices and markets and the new drivers and what action needed here. In the past 8 years or so, we have seen this development in the world grain prices. We have seen an increased trend, we have seen increased volatility, and we have seen increased spikes, extreme price developments. Let me show you what we see there. This is a filtered trends. On the left-hand side for maize or corn, on the right-hand side for wheat. On the left-hand side of this graph, the frequency of spikes. On the right-hand side, volatility. Volatility defined as the deviation of price series from a mean, and spike defined as sort of extremes which happen in short periods of time. We have to distinguish these three developments. They require different actions because they have different consequences for the economy and for poor people. Increased volatility is bad for investment. Increased price trends is good for investments because if people can expect they will continue. Increased spikes can be deadly for poor people if they cannot adjust their food consumption. So these developments challenge policymakers, these three different price developments which set in the last 5 or 6 years, challenge us in completely new ways. And the world is not well prepared for them. Oops. The findings of our analysis at our institute on these new price drivers and price developments actually, and I don't give you sort of econometric equations here, so be happy to point you to the respective work, are actually interesting in the following respect. Excessive speculation is a stronger cause than demand and supply side shocks for the spikes, the extreme developments. So speculation drives spikes upwards. It's a spike booster. The good side of the story is there's so much talk about speculation. We do not find a relationship between speculation and normal volatility. They don't drive up price levels. Demand shocks, however, second bullet here, so oil price development, is a stronger cause than market and supply side shocks for volatility. So the oil price volatility transfers very much into the disturbances in the food market and undermines investment in agriculture. Third, the relationship between financial crises and food price volatility is fairly strong and implies the significance of food commodities as financial instruments. Food commodities at the international market levels have become integrated into investment packages, which large investment funds compile, where the insurance companies, the banks, the private investors can invest in. Typically 10 or 12 items, say a little bit of wheat, some corn, some gold, some oil. So you place your money in such combined fund portfolios as an alternative to place it into a savings account. And when they go up and down, you have, when financial investment alternatives go up and down, you have a force into food price volatility. That's also new. So the financialization of the world food markets has had impacts, increasing impacts, much more impacts than, say, a drought in Australia by now, on the price developments in agricultural markets. So looking for agriculture solutions to the world food systems instabilities is no longer sufficient. The financial markets, the energy markets are overpowering. An implication for the Arab region is engage in the in regional Arab actions for price volatility and price spike prevention, for instance, through coordinated grain reserve policies. I would add also engage in the current debate about re-regulation. The United States and Europe have started to re-regulate grain markets to a certain extent upon the advice of the G20 and the United Nations. Now, these price shocks impact on poor people. Look just at the third and fourth column from the right over there. That's Egypt. The light column is how child nutrition tended to decrease earlier in the last decade. The green column shows how child undernutrition tended to increase towards 2008 in the price crisis, in price and income crisis. So Egypt was among those countries which showed increased malnutrition. People must have been very angry about that towards the end of the last decade. These statistics about nutrition performance are much stronger indicators of people's welfare than sort of accounting of income and counting of calories. Egypt, at the same time, has invested heavily in food subsidies, in subsidizing bread and flour and a few other items. The line item in 2011 probably was $5.5 billion US. Apparently with little effect on preventing nutrition deterioration. So food policies need to be transformed from, for instance in Egypt, but not only in Egypt, from a subsidy on consumption towards investment in people. So to respond to these price volatilities, you need another bundle of instruments which directly tend to reach people and not try to counter these market trends at a level where they cannot be countered, simply by general subsidizing the food for almost everyone. The elements of such alternative policies that have the focus to invest in people, focuses on the really needy, have cash and in-kind transfers on which people need to act, such as send their children to a secondary school or bring them to the health center, components of food fortification and biofortification, child nutrition and health actions, access to nutrition and good drinking water. So these are services. It's not a simple trick. These are complex, but they must be implemented at a local level. It requires community implementation, support, and action. Let me conclude, ladies and gentlemen, on the issues I've put before you. Regarding science strategy, I want to emphasize in the end that food and nutrition security is to be addressed far beyond agriculture. Yes, agriculture matters a lot, but to address it only through an agriculture channel will not be sufficient in the new bioeconomy context where the competition for biomass goes far beyond food and feed. Secondly, we need a transdisciplinary approach, as I've emphasized implicitly with the examples what to do about child nutrition. So not just an economist's approach, but it needs to be linked to health and to nutrition knowledge. We need a nexus approach which sees key issues linked and addressed simultaneously. There was a significant conference on these issues in Bonn last year, emphasizing especially the nexus between food security, water supply security, and energy security. We must place these types of new concepts into our scientific discourse, such as the nexus perspective, rather than think in terms of food value chains. So the social scientists among us must reinvent their conceptual frameworks, nothing less than that. The nexus perspective and placing the bioeconomy in it poses huge challenges for us to revisit how we model the food economy, how we target food subsidies, how we make efficient investments in technological and institutional innovations. Lastly, what research questions? The access to food and access to life agenda is big. It has a big research agenda. My colleagues in a moment will talk more about it, but I see these three issues as central. How to accelerate agricultural growth with what science and technology and what institutional innovations, that remains very important in the context of the bioeconomy as a nexus to energy and water. Secondly, how to respond to change of demand in the fast-changing bioeconomy context. So we need to reanalyze the demand side and how to reduce price and trade volatility. Thank you for your attention.
Our second speaker is Dr. Ian van Rijn. He's a senior research fellow at the International Food Policy Research Institute. He received his PhD from Wageningen Agricultural University in the Netherlands, and he is the coordinator for partnership in the Partnership, Impact Assessment and Capacity Strengthening PIC unit at IFPRI. In this capacity, he is responsible for the development, enhancement, and maintenance of strategic partnership and networks. He has played a role in the development and implementation of the Institute Middle East and North Africa strategy. Currently, he coordinates the IFPRI strategic partnership program, which looks at market access and climate change issues. Dr. Ian van Rijn provided leadership to numerous national and international projects and successfully participated in many fundraising efforts. Dr. van Rijn, you're welcome to give your speech.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Ladies and gentlemen, it's nice to be here at BioVision. It's my first time to be at BioVision, and it's a very special experience. As an economist, I had never really bothered to read a lot about genomes or genetics and things like this. And just this afternoon and today made me realize that it's a very exciting area and something that I want to learn more about. As mentioned, I work for the International Food Policy Research Institute. We are an international organization, research organization based in Washington, D.C., with a very large proportion of our staff that is outposted. At this moment, almost 40% of our staff are based in either Africa, Asia, or Latin America. Very big offices in Addis Ababa, in New Delhi, in Accra, in Dakar, and in many other countries. Our vision is a world free of hunger and malnutrition. And the way in which we would like to contribute to this is to provide policy solutions that reduce poverty and end hunger and malnutrition. And there's various activities in which we are involved. We are involved in the field collecting data, very much participating in multidisciplinary teams. We are part of not only a family of 15 international organizations, research organizations, but work with over 500 different partners. So really a collective effort. I've clustered my presentation along the following three topics. First, what are the major food security challenges that we are facing at a global level, mainly? How are we responding? How should we respond? How urgent is it? And finally, how has my organization, the CGIAR and IFPRI, recently come together to really face these challenges head on? Ladies and gentlemen, the challenges you see in front of you are not all that particularly new. But what is new are a few things. Firstly, that they're all more or less emerging at the same time. What is also new is the magnitude at which they are emerging and the enormous complexity with which they are coming. It implies that it's almost impossible for any one country by itself to completely solve these challenges or to face them. A real global approach, working together, is absolutely necessary if you want to face global food security challenges as we move forward. Many policymakers are by now very well aware of the fact that agriculture can play and has played a very crucial role to reduce poverty. But this potential is very often not met. And it's not met due to a number of reasons. There's a clear lack of evidence-based policies. Underinvestment in agriculture and rural development has been going on for many years, although there's a lot of positive signs also. Many African countries have stepped up their investments in agriculture and rural development. Limited political influence for smallholder farmers. Weak science and technology policies that limit development and adoption of agricultural technologies. And poorly performing and missing institutions and markets. These all contribute to a situation which we cannot afford, namely the food security challenges which are especially hitting the poorest of the poor. Population growth and demographic changes. We've already reached the 7 billion, a very impressive number of people. And very soon, in the not too far distant future, we'll be at around 9 billion people. Not only is the population growing very fast, particularly in Africa and in Asia, but also the demographic composition is changing very rapidly, where increasingly people are living in cities, and this will have huge implications for the quality and the quantity of food that will be required and demanded. IFPRI has, for a number of years, been publishing on an annual basis the Global Hunger Index, and it's based on a number of factors. In fact, the previous speaker, our previous Director General, was very much one of the thinkers behind this Global Hunger Index. It was one of his babies, if I can say this, but he has many babies. And the Global Hunger Index of last year indicated and showed that there were 26 countries that were facing extremely alarming levels of hunger. We looked at the macro level indicators for the Middle East and North Africa. And as you can see, all these countries that are not green or moderate are facing serious to very extremely alarming levels of hunger in this region at the macro level. If you look at the micro level, we use stunting as an indicator for risk of food insecurity. Again, if you look at all those countries that are not green or moderate or yellow, the others are either serious to extremely alarming, with Sudan, Yemen, and Djibouti, and Somalia on the extremely alarming scale. It was probably 6 or 7 months ago that the director of this institute gave a presentation at my institute, at the International Food Policy Research Institute. And he gave the Malthus lecture. And it was a lecture that made a lot of impression and had a lot of impact. And one of the things that he mentioned at this lecture was that we often do not fully understand and realize that access to food should be considered as a really basic human right. And if you look at the map in front of you, where we report that 171 million children under 5 are stunted worldwide, we clearly as a global community are not fulfilling this human right. Strong link between oil and food prices. Previous speaker has already alluded to this, so I will continue. Climate change is another aspect that has been slowly creeping up on us. We have seen it coming, but the time to act is really now. And those, if we do not act today, we will definitely be paying the price tomorrow and the day after. Why? Higher temperatures will have especially an enormous impact on yields and the way production can take place in developing countries. And it is those countries that will especially bear the brunt of the price of climate change on agricultural production and food security. Growing natural resource scarcities, it was also alluded to just now. From time to time, there is a very positive story. Just 2-3 days ago, the BBC gave a lot of publicity to the fact that in Africa there were enormous, vast quantities of underground water that could be used for all kinds of purposes. But overall, we cannot deny that with growing population and growing demand, we need to look at ways in which we can use our natural resources in a more efficient and in a better way. Responding to these crises, to these challenges, is not a luxury. Just 6 months ago, or a bit more, 6-7 months ago, we were in the middle of a crisis in the Horn of Africa, where a combination of different factors, crops, climate change, poor governance, refugee crisis, all these things culminated in a huge food security crisis with many people who lost their lives and faced starvation. Much shorter, just 2-3 weeks ago, all over the headlines, a new crisis looming in the Sahel. People facing starvation, once again. If you look at this picture on the right hand of this slide, it's heartbreaking and action is needed. It's needed urgently. I will go through a selection of actions which we propose at IFPRI that should especially be focused on in a very urgent manner. Invest in renewable energy technologies that minimize the food fuel competition. Has been alluded to already, and I think it would be good to ask ourselves a number of questions. Did we miscalculate the enormous impact that it would have if we put crops into the petrol tank? Did we miscalculate maybe the extent to which going after biofuels would make us more fuel independent, which in some countries was the objective? And did we miscalculate the positive effects that we wanted to have on the environment by going into the biofuels? And I think if we do have this discussion, it would be high time that we look at how we can look at other ways of having biofuels. Promote social protection, especially social safety nets for the most vulnerable groups. This is extremely important, especially for the poorest of the poor. When we had the big crisis recently in the Horn of Africa, large parts of Ethiopia would also have had enormous impact had they not have had a good social safety net in place. There are many examples of which we can learn and upscale to other regions. Support global and regional free trade. Time and time again, we hear that these trade talks do not make it for whatever reason. And at the same time, we also realize that we need free trade to stabilize global prices. We need trade to enable us to focus on our comparative advantages, and it will be in the benefit of all of us. Yet somehow we do not manage to do this. We need to show more with evidence that's what the advantages are, and we have done this at IFPRI quite a lot. Implement a global emergency physical grain reserve. We just talked about, or was presented to think about the grain reserve for the region. We have for some time been suggesting to also implement and to support a global grain reserve. I realize that there's a lot of debate always around this. Is it possible? Is it not too difficult to manage? Will it not be too expensive? Well, let's look at it, and let's look at examples that are out there. There is an example in Southeast Asia where they have started to develop a regional grain reserve. Currently, there is no such example at a global level. Consequently, the most vulnerable are hit the hardest when markets are volatile. A global emergency grain reserve can calm markets. The reserve should be owned and managed by an organization that has the infrastructure and the capacity to do this. The World Food Programme could be an example. And the reserve could be created through donations from the larger grain producers. Invest in smallholder productivity. This is so important to do in a comprehensive and in what was just called a nexus way. But not because I'm a Dutchman, but if you look at, for example, at the farmers in the polders, now I know you cannot always compare everything, where they have probably the most efficient way of doing agriculture. They get the highest yields that you can achieve. It's not these farmers on their own who did this. They had a whole apparatus behind them. University, all kinds of research organizations, the infrastructure that was put in place, the dissemination, the information technology that was provided to them. And indeed, they managed to do this by themselves. I have to rush. Climate change has been mentioned. Two more. Okay. Given the complexity and the CGIAR, this is the family of international research organizations of which IFPRI is also a member, has gone through quite a dramatic change itself. And it's for the first time that they have really put all centers together in big research programs with very clear objectives, where we have to work together, but not only us ourselves, but also all the way from inception of an idea to the implementation of an idea, to make sure that we work with the right partners. And it's in no ways research for research, but it really has to be to contribute towards benefiting for the poor. Food for people, environment for people, and policies for people. People are center. Broadened research mandate to include nutrition and health. Very much country-led approaches, so we work very much with local policymakers, and we have a very results-oriented strategy. Now, within the line of nexus thinking, we have put together a lot of different components, and in the CGIAR there are 15 big consortium research programs. These are huge programs with up to 500 different partners. IFPRI leads 2 of them. One on policies, institutions, and markets, where we look at inclusive governance and institutions. One on another theme on effective policies and strategic investments. And the third one, very important, on linking small producers to markets. The other global program that IFPRI is leading is on agriculture, nutrition, and health. This is a very new way of approaching it, and a new sort of research program at IFPRI, where we also add these different aspects together. And its objectives are to enhance nutrition along the value chain, biofortification, with which we've had a lot of success already in a number of countries, contributing to the prevention of blindness, and the prevention and control of agricultural associated diseases, and finally, the integration of programs and policies. I practiced very hard on my Arabic. I'm not sure if I managed, but so thank you very much.
Our next speaker is Dr. Mitoor Jagadish, or Jag, like he wishes to be called. Jag comes from India, from a village called Mitoor, close to Bangalore in India. He received his PhD from Dublin, Ireland, and spent 4 years in Ithaca, New York, as a postdoc. Actually, he has a cosmopolitan mindset, and he returned to Bangalore in 1996, which coincided with his switching to a career in industry. He has worked for VMS Research Foundation, AstraZeneca, and Monsanto, mainly on agriculture, biotechnology related issues. He is an active member of the village, Mitoor. It includes implementation of measures to improve the welfare of farmers, high school students, adults, and animals, continuously involved in biotechnology and community outreach, student career counseling, human interaction, and resources. With this background, I'd like to introduce Jag for his presentation. Thank you.
It's absolutely thrilling to be back here in Egypt and back here in Alexandria. And I'm quite humbled to be here on this stage, which is already being stepped on by many famous people who are all very great achievers. Of course, I've got a long way to go, but feel very privileged that I've been, the last time I was here in 2010, my presentation was in one of the other halls, B Hall, and I feel very honored that I got promoted to this great hall. So thank you very much to Professor Ismail Sargaldin and also Professor Magde Modkour. Thank you very much indeed. So I think I spent a lot of time working on genes in my professional academic career, but probably very less time interacting with farmers. So I thought I'd just introduce a little bit overlapping with what the chairperson introduced me to give the context why I chose this path of interacting with farmers. So my background has been in a village called Mitoor in Karnataka, southern India. My formal education has been in Bangalore as well as Dublin, Ireland. I had the opportunity and good luck to spend about 16 years of academic experience in India, Ireland, Germany, and Australia, working in universities in some very, very nice cities, as you see up on the slide. Following that, my academic interests were in microbial genetics, molecular biology, immunology, developing subunit genetically engineered vaccines, and lately in agriculture biotechnology. Following my return to India, I switched to industry, and that's where I had the opportunity to work with AstraZeneca in drug development. And then since my fundamental interest was in agriculture, I really grabbed the opportunity to work with Monsanto and also lately with Avastogen. And since October of 2010, I thought I probably had enough working with corporates and also with academic institutions, and maybe it's time for me to step out of that and feel a little bit free to work on my own, mainly interact with farmers, students, and teachers, and also maybe consult a few small companies. So the theme of this meeting is absolutely topical, quite amazing indeed, linking science to society. And the orientation guidelines that I got from the organizers that I should discuss what are the types of consultancies that I give to farmers, students, academic institutions, and small companies, and what is the role that biotechnology plays in small villages, especially for farmers. And of course, I had the advantage coming from a village background. I could easily connect to at least some of the people in the villages of India. So I'll be discussing a little bit about that. Of course, it's easy to call oneself a consultant, but of course, we will be making the mistake of acting as experts. But at least one should be aware of some of the challenges that countries like India face and what are some of the controversial areas. On the left side, many of you have heard, we hear that India is going through a rapid change. It's $1 trillion economy. We have the 4th largest purchase power parity. We're growing at a rate of 8 to 9%. We're going to be competing with China. We have many, many rich people in India. We are a very young country. I mean, we are an ancient country like Egypt. We share a lot of cultural backgrounds. But in terms of actual number of young people, I think we are probably the youngest country with something like 60% of 1.2 billion people seem to be in the age, who are going to be growing very quickly to the age where they can actually be working and contributing for the development of the world. So we must take advantage of that. India is blessed with several agroclimatic zones, so we can grow multiple crops in multiple seasons, and we have the potential to become a major food basket, and we can go on and on and on. And sometimes I hear this, but when I walk through some of the countryside or even some of the peripheral borders of the city side, I ask myself, what are we talking about? Because there is so much of poverty in contrast with the affluence that we seem to have in India. There are two extremes. There is a lack of political integrity, and lately, unfortunately, there is a lack of corporate integrity as well, as some companies did not behave themselves. We have scarcity of resources, water, land, and so on and so on. Nuclear power is being implemented, but there is some controversy about that because there is always an issue of safety and so on. Animals are not treated so well in India, unfortunately, being the land of Gandhi, who advocated ahimsa, who advocated nonviolence. Unfortunately, many of the animals are not necessarily treated very well, which I think is very important, for them to be taken care of if we as mankind are going to be progressing well. And agriculture, there is the talk of GMO impact, organic cultivation, pesticides, and so on. And of course, the presentation I would like to allude to is about agriculture and this amazing thing of rapidly happening rural migration of people from villages, from the countryside to the cities, which may be happening in Egypt as well. Just a few points. In India, some of you are familiar, I see a lot of senior people and colleagues who have been to India a lot of the times and who have contributed for many, many discussions in India. Our population is fast exceeding to 1.21 billion right now. Believe it or not, we're adding one Australia every year. That's about 18 million people. And in about 5 to 6 years, we're adding one Egypt. I mean, that's amazing. That's scary. But unfortunately, we are not adding the leaders, some of the past leaders of Egypt, into the population, or past leaders of India like Gandhi and Mother Teresa and maybe Nelson Mandela and people like that. So we must be adding these people as well. I hope they come along with this population increase. The resources are decreasing. The labor force is very, very high, over 500 million. A lot of them are in the countryside. We need to increase our production from something like 250 million metric tons, which is what claimed by the government in 2011, 2012, to 500 million metric tons in about 20 years, maybe 30 years. I mean, that's quite amazing. So we need technologies to be infused into the country. People need to be able to adapt these technologies, but they can only do that if they're aware of what lies ahead of them. Unfortunately, not many people are putting enough time in thinking what is ahead of them. So this is where I think we as scientists and social workers have to play a big role in terms of getting them to know some of the challenges that lie ahead of us. So the biggest concern I have, and many of you may have, is the excess migration to cities. In 2001, that's 11 years ago, the census showed 21 million rural people migrated to various cities in India. And the average of 31 people migrate every minute, most of them in search for basic needs unavailable in the villages. I was too scared to find out what is the migration rate in the subsequent years, because I get nightmares thinking about these millions and millions of people just coming from the villages into the countryside, into the cities. World food crisis has been mentioned by my previous speakers. I won't be dwelling on that anymore. But can India, can we enable India, countries like India, to benefit? Can we enable our farmers to plant more food crops? Can we improve our rural infrastructure? Can we provide more than, our governments are known for providing temporary reliefs every year. The loans are waived into billions and billions of dollars. Every year, the lots and lots of subsidies are coming up. But there's only short-term fixes. These are Band-Aid fixes, but there is no long-term solution to this. So can we provide more than just a temporary year reprieve? Enable our farmers and strengthen our country and other countries. So my question to me, myself, and to the others is that, hello, can we arrest this trend of migration from villages to the countryside, to the cities, by making village life more attractive? Can we reverse that? And technology can help reverse that, but unfortunately technology is, there is discrimination in technology, and biotechnology is one such example. I think urban people, we are very greedy, we are very, double-minded, we are hypocritical. We seem to accept technologies that benefit us, but we seem to interfere in technologies that may benefit various people in the rural side, particularly biotechnology. Public seem to be okay with vibrant defense technologies that India seem to acquire from the developed countries like the US, Russia, France, and many other countries. If there is any controversy, it's only controversy about are these fighter jets better than the other fighter jets? Are these much faster? They can deliver more bombs from fighters from Russia versus fighters from USA, things like that. But no one gets involved in any of this. So imagine fighting with ancient technologies like swords and daggers, with neighbors who may be willing to wage war against India. We just won't succeed. But India is a sovereign country. It has to protect itself, and it has to have all these modern weapons so that we can stand for ourselves. But unfortunately, you go to agriculture, we don't seem to be so accommodative in taking up new technologies for agriculture. We still predominantly, by and large, we seem still to be living in ancient technologies, and that's very much prevalent every time you travel in India, in various parts of India. And our neighbors, we heard the talk from Professor Yang, how fast they're progressing. And they're progressing because China has made a huge commitment to make sure they're self-reliant. Also, with a huge population in China, they have to be self-reliant. They cannot keep importing food from other countries. And India should follow that suit. So we need to make sure that, there is this war of economics. War is not just war out of weapons, but war of economics where, other countries adopting new technologies, like biotechnology, can become much more superior than India is. So we need to be addressing those questions as well. A case in hand is cotton, BT cotton. After a long struggle of something like 7 years, India finally approved the commercial cultivation by farmers of BT cotton. This was in 2002. 1996 was when first a company called Mexico applied for licenses, various approval processes. It took about 7 years for the government to approve. And before that, prior to 2002, the cotton farmers were literally fighting against the pest, the bollworm and many other worms alike, by either using biological control or by using chemical pesticides, or even by stopping cultivation. Unfortunately, those were not necessarily very successful. And the production rate, we were still the largest area under cotton, but in terms of production volumes, we were one of the poorest. But since 2002, you all have heard how India has transformed itself from a cotton importing country to a cotton exporting country. We're only second to China in terms of volumes of cotton. 2010, 2011, the area under cotton was something like 11 million hectares, and we produced something like 34 million bales. Now, there is so much cotton around, and there is so much of reliable income from the cotton-growing farmers. More and more farmers growing other crops are trying to switch to cotton, which again is a dangerous sign because we will be depriving of other crops, other food crops, other vegetable crops. So this is something that we should be addressing. We have seniors like Professor Mark von Montague, Professor Ingo Petraikas, and Clive James from ISAAA, who know so much about India, and these are the people who have actually warned of some of these challenges that we have ahead. But Brinjal is another story. Aubergine is another story. The technology has already been developed and it's available for implementation. Certain committees have approved, but because of some opposing voices, very strong voices supported by some NGOs from outside as well, BT Brinjal has been stopped in the pipeline. But the technology is available, very much so, but it's going to be some time before we can see BT Brinjal in the fields. So farmers continue to live with damaged brinjals or pesticides. We continue to buy worm-infested brinjals and then continue to consume them. So this is a choice where biotechnology has not been moving fast enough in a country like India. So there are lots and lots of genes around. So we've already heard that this is the natural evolution. There are many, many genes that are beneficial. So, and then we don't need to go into the evolution of ourselves. It's already been talked about. But how can we, as scientists, utilize some of the beneficial genes to mitigate challenges that seem to be facing many, many countries in the world. And this is where I think a lot of us have to really carry the population with us in terms of communicating to them. Otherwise, the technology is going so rapidly, we're just leaving the large population behind, and we're going to be facing problems when it comes to farmers and others, consumers, adopting this technology. It's hypocritical in a sense that when it comes to pharmaceuticals and medicines, we don't seem to ask any questions. We just seem to accept any medicines the doctors prescribe. Particularly when a patient is in ICU, you get a huge list of medicines. We just go to the chemist and buy anything that is produced. We want to make sure our relative comes back safely. But when it comes to food, there's always bargaining, there's always opposition, and so on. So that's what very hypocritical. So we become really, really excellent in the art of gene manipulation. You've already heard that this morning and later this afternoon. Lots of genes have been identified and tailored for crop improvement. There are many trans genes coming from organisms away from the crop of interest, and also many cis genes which are much closer to the crop of interest. Several new biotech crops have been released in many countries, North and South America, Australia, Asia, Africa, and maybe also 1 or 2 countries in Europe. If you look at India, BT cotton is the only crop so far that has been approved in India. We just celebrated 10th year anniversary in the month of March. And other farmers, I mentioned to you already, BT cotton has been so successful, despite all the news that you hear opposing this, has been so successful. Many, many other farmers are switching to BT cotton and actually not getting into growing other crops, other pulses and things like that, which are very much required for India. Many crops have continued to be blocked in India, and there are extremely high regulatory costs. So with this, the impact is many companies, particularly small companies, even big companies are asking themselves, is it worth investing further in biotechnology? So they become very hesitant. And the demand in biotech academia is also falling down. If you go to universities, this morning Professor Bruce Alberts mentioned that we need biochemists. I would like to mention that we need microbiologists, we need botanists, we need zoologists. We need all these people because more and more people are going towards other subjects where there may be money. It could be commerce, finance, and MBA degrees, but unfortunately not many people are coming into, even in India, with so many people, so many young students, not coming into subjects that we very much require. So the demand in academia is falling, and agribiotech as a new life science is struggling. Thank you. So biotech and community outreach must intensify, and I was really pleased to hear this morning that so many of the high achievers, Nobel laureates, are reaching out in many parts of the world. In the absence of which, there will continue to be what I call as the default agriculture. In non-cotton growing and dryland areas of India, in the absence of traits to confer disease-free, drought tolerance, less fertilizer intensive, less labor intensive, monkey-proof, we have a lot of monkeys, which come and destroy crops. Human theft-proof, inedible crop seeds by and large, many farmers continue to rely on, in the area where I come from, mulberry, silkworms and silk, milk, lots and lots of trees, eucalyptus trees, tamarind trees, mango trees, but how much can we have? How much silk, do we need? How much milk do we need? So this is not enough for the farmers. Plus, added to this, poor infrastructure is really making them to leave the villages and migrate to the cities. So our focus lately has been also to address some fundamental issues at the school level, at the high school level, because that's where what I call as the teen power exists, looking at the leadership, creativity, education, and also health and hygiene. If we try to provide this to them, hopefully the children would want to stay back in the villages, so they will convince their fathers and their parents to stay back. So there is a school that we are looking at, a couple of schools we're looking at, and every time I go to the school, I feel there's an endless potential, for improving welfare in the villages here. So we try to expose them to various visitors. It could be the top left is a nephew of a freedom fighter, the top right is a teacher from Australia, and the bottom left is a biotechnologist, international biotechnologist, and the bottom right, a bunch of foreign people came to Bangalore and they wanted to visit mid-tour, and they had a great time working with the students. We tried to get a scientist interact during the night class. And there are lots and lots of urban professionals, like-minded people who want to go out and who want to reach out to the villages. And we have such wonderful people. Identify them many, many more. And we need to identify these people and bring them to the villages because they're only too happy to share their technologies. Like the dentist on the top left is only about 35 years old, young man. On the bottom left is an elderly person of 86-year-old. It's so hard to keep up with him because he's trying to implement so many things in the villages. On the right side is a biophysicist, is a physicist who is an energy specialist. He's trying to come and implement how to trap energy, solar and otherwise. So there are many people who try to provide alternate source of energy, provide poor students a pack with a battery as well as a solar lamp. The child will come to the school, charge it in the charging station like the way we charge our mobile phones, and go back home with that battery and connect to the lamp. So there's an incentive for the parents to send their children as well to the school. So this is happening more and more. So children attend the school. Health and hygiene, purified water to drink, and bring in technology to villages so that villages don't have to go in search of technology, bring the technologies to the villages. And clean up, reduce, recycle, reuse. The whole country of India, or perhaps other countries as well, is getting flooded with lots and lots and lots of plastic. I'm not sure if there's going to be any technology anywhere that can actually withdraw plastic from the environment. But we try to sensitize young people to reduce, recycle, and reuse. And just a few more slides. Now, of course, we cannot forget agriculture while I'm trying to concentrate on the children. So can we expose farmers to crops other than what they're growing where they're not getting enough income? So one such family of crops we're trying to expose them is to medicinal aromatic plants. I don't need to tell people of Egypt about medicinal aromatic plants because this is the land of essence, and we had the pleasure of visiting an Essence Institute in Cairo, and I was absolutely amazed with the amount of work and the amount of innovation that is happening there. So we grow species. We try to involve farmers right up front so that they can interact right up front with the technologies, bring them to cities, get them to grow. All of that, try to expose them to distillation, and of course, create interest in children for them to really get into science. It could be genes, it could be plant propagation. And rural children, they're always there trying to reach out to us, and we must reach out to strengthen hope and desire of our rural communities. I'll leave that, a consultancy in academia, small companies. None of this is a heritage that we have in India, but none of this will matter. Despite our past rich heritage, none of this matters if we don't empower our farmers of today and tomorrow and produce more, conserve more. And I hope something like this is happening in Egypt as well. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you for the three speakers. I think we have time to entertain a few questions. Then if you have a question, please raise your hand and address it to the speaker, please.
Hello. My question is for Dr. Van Rijn. I apologize if I pronounced your name wrong. I was curious about your idea for a grain reserve in the Middle East. I know that Egypt is like the world's largest importer of grain, so I was wondering how the subsidy of wheat would work in dynamic with your idea for a grain reserve, and who would the exporters be?
We were not quite sure whether you meant Mr. Van Rijn or Mr. Von Braun, but probably both have the same answer. We are arguing for a sophisticated type of reserve, a physical combined with storing money rather than grain, a so-called virtual grain reserve. We have done this type of research, which would put countries in a position to respond to shortages by combining their actions by piling up some grain, be it in Alexandria or Abu Dhabi here in the region, at times when it's not too expensive, that should be gradually built up, and secondly, manage their risk by investing in the futures market. So hedging, not speculating, but thereby having a claim for the next 12 to 18 months to access grains. The combined approach of that is what I would personally advocate. the current inefficient situation which we have is that every country tries to pile up a little bit of grain and thereby further tightening the market and wasting fiscal money.
Yeah.
Please go ahead.
Yeah, my question goes to Dr. Jaga. It goes this way: how do we improve on reorienting the policymakers? Because you've talked about so many infrastructures and the shift to the rural communities. How do we reorient the government, the policymakers themselves, so they can put more systems in place for monitoring and evaluation of such projects in the rural communities? Because most times the onset of the program is wonderful, but they are not long lasting. Then another thing is the supply of biologically engineered crops to the farmers that have termination issues, restrictions, in the sense that they cannot have maybe more than second generation from those crops. So they do not seem to see them or appreciate them as viable options. Thank you.
Okay. Yep. Thank you very much for the question. And it is tough. It's not going to be easy to implement any new technology or any new policy. The approach that I and some of the people that I work with have taken is to work independently, to stay away. I mean, respect the law of the land, respect the policies, but stay away from certain vested interest groups so that we can work independently and gain the confidence of the farmers, gain the confidence of the children, gain the confidence of the people. If we win their heart, I'm sure there's going to be support, and the government cannot say no to that. So that's the approach that we are trying to take, but it is not going to be easy because, particularly in a country like India, which has got such a heterogeneous population, we have several religions, we have several castes, we have several languages, several dialects. To bring them onto one table, to speak, to use one theme or one language is not going to be easy. But we have to try, and we continue to try. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we'll take two more questions before we close. Please.
Okay. I just want to ask about the economic crisis that face the world. There is many people shouting out, okay, we need to establish some changes, and we hear a lot about Islamic economy. So I want to hear your opinion on Islamic economy, and is it really something that's going to fix this problem? Or let's say if Islamic economy is an annoying world, let's say an economy with morals. So will that fix the problem, the world credit crisis, or not? Thank you.
Let me make the following remarks. I participated in the Islamic World Economic Forum in Jakarta 3 years ago. And if I look at successful Islamic states, such as Malaysia and Indonesia, which partly practice Islamic banking, or which strengthen institutions such as zakat in the context of community social safety support, which I've also seen work well in Bangladesh. There are elements in what you call Islamic economics which can work quite effectively. But all in all, I see the successfully economically growing Islamic states not adopt any particular Islamic policies, but simply good economic policies. So I think good economic policies serve Islamic people, and there is not too many special aspects about Islamic economics as far as I can make out.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Salah. And then I have actually a written question from Mu'taz Adil from the Faculty of Agriculture. Then I will address it after Dr. Salah. Thank you.
My name is Salah Salman. I'm from Alexandria University, and actually since early this morning we've been talking about responsibility. And as we have 2 out of the 3 speakers of this session who was a background in economy, and I think we need to learn more about the subsidy being given to ethanol or grain-based ethanol production and its impact on the world hunger as well. I think a brave step been taken by the Chinese government just this week to cut the subsidy for ethanol or grain-based ethanol by half, and to end this support by the year 2015. This is 3 years from now. I think we need to switch from "in God we trust" to "God trust us." Thank you.
Thank you. The last part I couldn't follow. From God trust to what? Oh, yes, yeah. Good point, yeah. I cannot argue with this. But I think what is important that with these policies that have been implemented and that have had negative impacts on poor people, the role from our side as economists, but as from scientists or from researchers, is to come forward with evidence to show that these policies can be improved on. And that is a role that we take very seriously.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Okay, Dr. van Rijn, when you have the microphone, this question is addressed to you. And it's from, as I mentioned, Mu'taz Adel. He's asking about, we know that radiation of food is a safe approach to preservation of food. And he's wondering, why don't we expand on use of radiation for food preservation? If you'd like to have a go into this.
Why do we expand on what? On
the use of radiation, like X-rays and so on. He mentioned X-rays, of course, but why don't you use radiation as a means of preservation of food?
I'm sure this is something that is being looked in some of the institutes. In my institute, we don't particularly look at this, but I'm not very knowledgeable on the use of radiation for food production, but maybe my neighbor is.
Well, as far as I know, food regulations for all sorts of foods do accept radiation for preservation, such as the whole herbal food market would not function without it. But let me give a broader answer. We have to find all technological and means to stop waste and to reduce food losses. Of course, the largest share of losses we find among fruits and vegetables, but also in the staple foods and in the animal sector we find lots of losses. For Egypt, being more and more a country where people also eat outside of house, large losses also exist in the retail and in the restaurant sector. The studies in Europe have shown that a share of loss in the UK or Germany of about 30% of food actually sold is lost at the end of the food chain. In developing countries, the losses are in farmers' field and in storage. So any technology, well tested, needs to make us much more efficient to prevent these losses and the waste. The waste needs to be cut by changed behavior of people in rich countries and rich segments of the world population in general.
Well, thank you very much. I think it's just past 7. I'd like, first of all, to thank you, the audience, for being so persistent to stay until 7 o'clock, and also to thank our panel. And see you tomorrow. Thank you very much.